Today, we will be talking about what is supposed to be the crown achievement in our journey through this perspective and shadow casting, namely constructing shadows in perspective. Now, why do we want to learn that? There are like massive serious reasons for that. First of all, we need to know that so when, for example, when we do concept sketches, we can select the lighting that's most appropriate for the scene and showcases the action in the best possible way. We need to know it when we work on environment pieces, for example, when we have to integrate 3D or 2D photography, and we need to do it correctly and match the lighting and shading. And also, this is a very important aid for us when we do painting, when we work in colors, because that helps us to understand how the color is distributed for the scene and what it should look like and how we need to adjust it to make it work for the image. Now, of course, all of this is not a subject for a single discussion. I think we would have to expand it into 2 more sessions where we will tackle the rendering and color, and probably do a separate session on our photography integration, which would be something like an introduction into basics of matte painting. So I took some quality time, and I constructed that simple scene that we could use here. I kind of hope that people would do something like that so we could use their scenes, but I understand we're all busy. The point is, this is a craft, and it needs to be practiced. A person needs to do it at least 1 or 2 times to like really remember what's it all about. So it kind of looks a little bit complex, but it's not, because all the lines you see here, it's just a series of super simple operations, right? We cast a plane, we cast a ray, we find intersection, we find the points, the edges that define the geometry. And I use a cylinder here, so to use the occasion to show how a complex surface could be constructed in perspective space. Basically, what we do, we approximate it to a rectangular prism, right? We do a construction cage, and then based on the points that define the geometry of the cylinder, we just draw it here. So anyway, that was the introduction. I can close this. So now we can move into our perspective space. The beauty of it is that since we know how it works, or I suppose most of us know by now it works, we don't need the side view, we don't need the top view. We can turn it off and work directly in perspective space. Okay, so the only thing we need to know is where the horizon is, and if we need some auxiliary construction lines, we still keep the vanishing points for the objects here. So I'm just gonna change the tilt on my tablet, and we'll jump right in. Okay, so let's turn everything off, and we'll start from scratch. The first thing that we need to know is how actually the thing works, right? So I'm going to create a blank layer and just do some hand sketches here. So even when we work on a 3D frame, we still need to think about it on 2 levels. One is like a purely graphic aspect of it. It's a flat image. at the same time, we need to have a mental image of what kind of 3D space it represents, right? So here is our setup. This is our projection screen, right? Here is us as an observer, right? And behind that projection screen, we have an object. And somewhere far, far away, we have the infinity. This is where all the parallel lines will converge. So what we need to keep in mind all the time is we need to imagine in our head what happens when we light the scene with a particular lighting source. So let's say we have a point source and it sits somewhere here. Now, if we just mark a position like this in space, we cannot do anything with it because we don't know what is its relative position to the object we want to light, right? So we need to know where it sits on the ground. This is the most important point. And with this, now we can start shooting rays because it's, you know, a linear nature of light that allows us to do that, right? So we shot the rays here. And now we need to find the intersection of the ground plane to define the shape. And to do that, in fact, we should start the other way around. So first of all, we need to use the casting plane and go through each and every point we want to construct the shadow from, right? So let's say here is the plane number one, right? So what we draw as a line in our perspective viewport, in reality, is an infinite plane that slices through our space, okay? And it leaves that trace on the ground. Now, within that plane, we can cast a ray, And since this is a line and this is a line, now we have a valid intersection. So we just repeat the same simple procedure, right? And that would give us the points that will define the shape of the cast shadow and will also tell us which face of the object receives lighting and which is in the shade. So that seems pretty easy. Now, the point of this exercise, again, is to do it just 2 or 3 times, just to have a mental image of what's going on when we use lighting without the use of 3D. In reality, when we do painting or when we come photography, we don't need to do precise construction, right? We just need to indicate the lighting direction and paint a shadow that looks plausible, credible. So to do this, in most cases, we don't even need to hit all the points of the object. Like, for example, if we are to create a shadow from a character here, of course, it would have a very particular shape. But if we work, for example, if we do a quick sketch, all we need to do is to indicate the direction of the lighting, its projection on the ground, and then shoot the true ray that will give us the shadow length. The rest we could just paint. And if it's painted, like I said before, confidently, and it has the right direction and matches perspective, we will believe it, right? But to be able to do that on the fly, we still need to do a technical exercise. So far so good with the point light. Now, what happens when we use the sunlight? So sunlight is, for all aims and purposes, is a collection of parallel rays. Well, they're not actually parallel, but with the distance, they're parallel. So let's say we want to light this cube from the front, okay? And here's our rays coming in. So right now we cannot do anything with them because we don't actually know how they are oriented in space. So we need to know their projection on the ground, right? So their projection on the ground, for example, could be this. Okay, so all these lines are parallel. That means that if we extend them into infinity, they will converge in a vanishing point here, right? And the vanishing point here would be the one sitting on the horizon, right? So our horizon in our viewport is not a line. It's an infinite plane that goes all the way through space, and where it hits the infinity, it becomes the horizon. So all the lines that are parallel, and we're talking about lines not just parallel to each other, but if they belong to parallel planes, and they could point this way as well, right? Their vanishing points would be always on the same horizon. Okay. Now, what happens when we have a tilted line? So let's look at the viewport. We have a horizon, and we have a vanishing point for all the lines that belong to the ground, right? And others that are parallel. Okay, so we have this vanishing point. What if this line is inclined like that at an angle? Where would be its vanishing point? Very simple. We, again, shoot the casting plane through any of those. And when they arrive here, right, they create a slice trace on the infinity plane, which we see only as a line. So if we extend that line here, we get our true vanishing point for all the inclined lines. And for example, this is how we construct staircases in perspective. So let's say in our viewport, we have a base of a staircase, right? And it goes to the vanishing point on the horizon. Then we create that vertical slice, the line, and are based on the desired inclination of that plane, which is peak here, vanishing point. So all the lines that belong to that part of the stair, all these guys, they will converge here, right? And then we can subdivide it and have a real nice stair in perspective. Now let's make a little mental leap here and imagine, okay, this is not a stairs. Let's say this is the sun, okay? Because it sits in our at infinity, compared to where we are. So that means that if this is a plane, so those rays coming through will actually create a cast shadow here. So what I'm driving at is every time we start working on the lighting, we need to keep in mind this. So this is our viewport. This is the horizon. So if the sun is coming from behind our head, the ray projection on the ground would go there, right? But what about the true ray? Because it kind of points this way, right? So by the same token as in previous image, we just draw the vertical slice and then we mark the position of the true sun. This is where all the sun rays that come from behind our head will converge in infinity. It's counterintuitive, but this is how it works, okay? just imagine that you move your head, you look down, and all lines that are parallel to you, they start converging downwards. So this is how it works. So when you pick the lighting, you right away are making the first call. Say, okay, if my sun is in front of the picture plane, somewhere here, the vanishing points for the sun would always be down, here, there, everywhere, okay? If my sun is behind the picture plane, all the vanishing points will be somewhere here, upwards, right? Because the rays would come towards us and they will converge their origin point. If the rays originate behind us, they will converge in a vanishing point in infinity, okay? So that's the very, very basic thing that we need to wrap our head around. Now with that, we can actually start doing stuff. So the first thing, for example, if we're picking a lighting direction for these two objects, it doesn't matter. It could be two buildings or an ancient statue and a big altar sitting to it. No, not important. First of all, we will need to pick a direction and I say, for the exercise sake, I want this object here to cast a shadow on the cylinder, right? And how do I do it? Easy peasy. I just create a slice on the ground, right? And then I can adjust it, just rotate it the way I want, and I place it at the bottom point of the vertical edge of the prism and say, I want this edge to cast the shadow on the cylinder, right? Looks kind of okay, fine. And then I just move it so I get the intersection, and by accident it fell on the edge of the, but it could be here, it could be there, it doesn't matter. So let's keep it somewhere here, right? And this gives us the right to mark here the vanishing point for all the horizontal projections of the sun rays. Okay, I'm dyslexic, ground. All right. So right away, what kind of information we get from this? We already know that with the curved surfaces, the shade starts where the ray touches the tangent point. We'll do just that. And lo and behold, right away, we have a hit here. And since we're going to have the sun coming from this direction, right? We know that this plane of the prism will be in shade. And this gives us a right to create a nice and clean shadow mask for the shade. Just do it like real quick. Get it fill. There we go. And then since we know that shade will be much lighter than cast shadow, we just set it to, I don't know, 40%. So we know what happens here. Okay. Now, again, we will start with something like really easy, because casting shadow from one object casting onto another could be complex. We'll just leave it for the very end. First of all, we need to know what happens to the cylinder. Okay, but before that, we need to know where actually the sun is. So we just draw that vertical slice line in the infinity going for the vanishing point. And then we can make the second important call here. Basically, how high is the sun? Because it will define the length of the shadow. Why is it important? Because shadows are pretty strong graphic elements. And now we have the ability to choose our options, like what kind of shadow we want, what would be its visual mass, so it will work for our picture. Here, I'll just choose something like that. And we would select a point that we can use in our work, like for example, this point here, right? And at this moment, we're not thinking about a cylinder as a cylinder. In reality, what we're going to do, we will select vertical edges here and then horizontal ones. And we will create shadows from separate sticks. Let's forget that it's a solid, right? And which sticks to use? Obviously, those that are in the shade, will cast. That's it. So we place this the true sun ray here, and it gives us an intersection here. So that's the sun and its true position. Okay. And right away we get the first hit. We know that this vertical edge where the shading on the cylinder starts will cast a shadow right into this point. From then on, it's pretty much straightforward. So if I have a construction lines, like what is of interest to me? It's obviously the axis. Why? Because the furthermost part of the circle here would be the furthest part of the shadow, right? So all I have to do is to slice for the cylinder, smack for the center, and I'm slicing backwards, right? It doesn't matter. Okay, so that gives me an intersection point here. Now, this ellipse could be like really squashed, and the intersection might not be precise. So say, oh, hey, I have a better one here. So I might as well slice through this one. Let's just do it more precise. Okay. So in reality, this is not a line we're looking at, right? This is an infinite slice plane that goes through the entire space, and where it hits the cylinder, it leaves a slice trace, okay? So we just mark it here. All right, and now that we have it, we don't need to deal with the cylinder at all. There's just one little stick that will project the shadow on the ground. And that's what we do, which is the shoot a ray at this point, okay? And we have our slicing plane here, and we get the second point. And now we can just repeat that simple operation for the invisible part of the cylinder here. So again, we create that vertical edge, and we shoot a ray for it. And here we have an intersection. So we have 3 points. 3 points is more than enough to create a curve. Of course, we could be super precise, right? We could take all the, like 6 points that could comprise the precise ellipse, that define a precise ellipse, shoot the rays from them, and do it like really precisely. But we don't have to, because all we need to do, we could even draw it like that. Whether this point is accurate is absolutely irrelevant. What's important that the shadow has the correct character. It's surrounded here. It reduces the width in perspective, and it originates at the correct point. So with this, we have the rights to take our lasso tool and just create a nice shadow mask. And we already talked why we want to have shadow masks, because if we're integrating CG or this is NLO photography into our source plate, we don't want to lose the detail, right? We just want to use the mask as a selection and grade the piece of the source plate. Okay, so we fill it in. There we go. I call it cylinder shadow. All right. Now we have to deal with this guy. So let's go and create another layer. Let's see. Okay. So we already have a ray. We'll hide the shadow for now. Now this ray and the slice is here on the ground, right? We already have it. So we just do like a little check. We know that this edge will cast the shadow here, right? But it will be already hidden by the cast shadow of the cylinder, so we don't need to worry about it, right? Now, what about this horizontal edge? Of course, we could also like shoot another ray and find this precise point on the ground, but we remember the important piece of information that parallel lines cast parallel shadows on the ground. So we don't need to do construction because we already have the vanishing point for the prism. Okay, it's here. So all we have to do is just draw this line, right? And if we want to know if there's like a little angle that happens here, okay, we just draw another slice, and we know, okay, this edge actually will cast the shadow here. And then this part of the shadow would be parallel to this line. We can do a precise construction, right? But we don't have to. We just know it will go somewhere in the same vanishing point as those edges of the hidden plane, right? So we can do just that. Right? And then we'll pick the invisible edge and we'll cast a ray. And we know, okay, this intersection is hidden behind the cylinder. So we don't care about it at all. What we care about is just this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the shadow on the ground. But we won't see it from here to there. Sorry. You can just deselect it, right? And we can fill it black. And just add this and erase the part that we don't need here. Okay. So there we go. We have two shadows. We call it prism shadow. And now we need to tackle the last part of our equation here. So obviously, it's clear this shadow will be stopped by the cylinder, right? And since we know that the parallel line casts a parallel shadow, we can just simply draw the line up. Hey, we already have that ray going there into true sun position. So we can mark the point here. We know that this point will cast a shadow on the cylinder here. Now we need to know what happens with the rest of the shadow. Okay, and that's where we talk about its character. Now, again, we could like shoot multiple custom planes and rays and get all these points that comprise the curve, but we don't have to. We'll just pick the edge, the last visible edge of the cylinder, okay? And we slice backwards through it until it hits our prism. So we know that this part of this face that's comprised of infinity of vertical edges will hit the last visible edge, okay? And then we just shoot a ray from that point into the sun vanishing point, and that gives us an intersection. And now, instead of constructing the precise shape here, we'll just remember one thing, that a straight line on a curved surface casts curved shadow. Okay, I'll just do this. So we're done. Now all we have to do is just to create a mask for this part. And we call it cast cylinder from prism. Now we can just turn them on and uncheck all our ugly construction lines that we don't need. Okay, and we need to turn on the shade. Call it shade. There we go. We have our perfect solution. Now we can render it. We can apply textures, material gradients, our blue cast from the sky, and render it to any degree of realism we want. So the point of this exercise was just to show how the mechanic works and how can we easily create something like that. But what is the practical application? Okay, let's uncheck all this. Let's say I'm doing a scene of I don't know, interior of mysterious fantasy temple, style Indiana Jones. Okay, and this is a beautiful statue standing here, and this is an altar. It's a little bit tall for an altar, but I can cut it off later. So I want to have an image that creates a mysterious atmosphere, and that kind of like showcases my beautiful statue. So I will have a focal point here. How do I do it? Well, I just use the lighting. First of all, I want to figure out how I'm going to light it. Let's say I can create a doorway. There will be a wall here, right? We're looking inside the temple. And from that wall, from that doorway, will be coming a ray of brilliant sunlight, okay? And now I need to decide where I want my sun. So this will be my focus, so I don't want it here. That means when I select the direction, and it will coincide with the vertical part of the opening casting shadow, I need to be sure this plane doesn't receive any light. So something like that, would that work? Definitely. Now I want to do the second check. I don't want this guy to cast on this one, okay? So I say, right, this will be the vanishing point for the ground projection. There we go. Works like a charm, okay? And what will be the cast shadow from the statue? Okay, I shoot another slice plane and then another slice plane, okay? Now I know that when I'll do my sketch, this will be cast shadows. Okay. And since we know how the shading works, I know that this part of the prism will be in shade. And I don't even need to do it that way, right? I'm just showing off, doing something like really nice and accurate. But in reality, I just draw several lines and go with my artistic brush. So edit fill, and it will be shade, I'm sorry, I should have used a different layer. And since it's a shade, it will be lighter than the cast shadow. Now, I want to go for a very specific effect. I want, like, let's say there's a head of a statue, someone eroded, and there she would have, it's a beautiful goddess, a woman. She has her hands, arms holding something here and some intricate folds. And just to remember that, let's say, like, I imagine something like this. She stands here holding a cup, and there are like beautiful folds of her garments and whatever, and some stuff at her feet. Okay. Now, I want to have an effect where my sun touches only this, and this will disappear in the shade. Okay, easy peasy. I just need to select the height at which my sun is shining, right? And I need to take into account two factors. First of all, how long I want these cast shadows. Like if I want them very long, then my sun should be really low, right? So the shadows will go out of the frame. But I have another tool here. I have the actual door opening. So I can use this. So let's say I don't want my sun too low, right? I want to show something like early afternoon. And for that matter, my sun would be sitting somewhere here. And then I will fade these cast shadows into glow. So that means that when the sun hits my statue head on, and in this case, it's this edge here, right? I want the lit part go as high as this point, okay? So what I need to do now is to decide where I want to have my wall with an opening. And I just make an arbitrary call here. Let's say the wall is at this angle, doesn't matter. Then I'll look at this intersection and say, okay, this is where the opening will begin. And now I need to make the second call. I need to know like where the lintel would be that will cast the shadow. I'm saying, okay, let it be somewhere here, right? So it will go somewhere in the vanishing point. And I want a little bit of light here. So this part is really sculpted against the sunlight. So should array on the ground and say, okay, that means that my opening should end here. But it's not really good for the composition, right? So I can adjust right away. I can say, all right, it will be wider. So it will be something like that. Now I have the right to take my artistic brush. I just say, all right, this is all lit. And everything outside will be shaded. But maybe I want a little bit of light here. Say, okay, no problem. Then I will just extend my doorway and add it to my selection. So I have this, okay, and I'll just erase what I don't need here. And I erase what I don't need here. And now I need to find out like this part, which part of the doorway will cast on the cylinder. It's very easy. I already selected this edge. That's the foremost facing the opening. And I trace it to this line, right? I treat it as a solid wall. I go up and say, okay, this point will cast here. And I choose just this. And that means that all this is in the shade, okay? But that's not what I want. So now I have two options to correct. Either I lower my sun down and it doesn't change the shape of the shadows on the ground, right? So if I lower my sun and say it's like this, actually I can mark the point where I want my shadow to start. So I do this and say, okay, instead of here, my sun will be there. And since I remember that the straight line casts a curved shadow, then I will just do this. And I get my solution for my sketch. Now I can, take my artistic brush and start rendering. Just turn my sketch on and say, okay, here goes the lady. Everything in the cast shadow facing this will be dark. There will be like some ambient occlusion on her. There will be cast shadow from the hands. And the hands actually will receive the light here. Okay. And there will be like some hot spots. And then I can go and start rendering the environment and saying, okay, there's some stuff going on here, and I'm gonna make it slightly darker here. And since, of course, this is a cast shadow on the ground, I need to make it darker, and I will create this kind of gradient. And what else can I squeeze out of it? Oh, I can give this portal a thickness. Okay. But that means that I will see the underside of it. Sure, no problem. It will be shaded. I already know that. And it will be more lighter than the interior because it will get bounced light from here. So the only thing missing here would be the cast shadow. So how do I do it? Well, I know that the cast shadow will originate here, obviously, right? So I will just need to construct the cast shadow of this invisible edge on the ground, right? But I'm doing a fast sketch, and I don't want to. Okay, well, it's 44 minutes. Okay, so I know that a straight line on a straight surface, when the light angle is tilted, it will cast an oblique shadow. And since it's a cave temple and the surface is uneven, I would just make it of the form that convenes more the image. And then say, okay, the light here is so brilliant that it attracts the eye. And there is something like the background I can see. And oh, the last thing missing, here is Indiana Jones here. And he can actually be standing next to the wall in some nice dynamic pose and actually touching it. So I just do my X reconstruction. Here is the direction of the sun. Here's its position. Here's the height of the guy. All right, no worries. Tack, 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 tack. And then there would be the shadow of his arm that contributes to the expressiveness of the scene. There you go. It's like you can do anything. Now, instead of this kind of low contrast, dirty, blue, greeny, dirty, brownish backlit plates, you can actually conceive those sculpted, expressive environments where you can showcase only what you want to showcase. And if you work with photography, now you can extract the lighting direction from it and integrate your fragments seamlessly. And if they don't match 100%, which they never do, you will just draw a line saying, okay, here is the tangent. This is where the shade should start. And you just like paint in the missing shade or paint in the missing light. And now that you have a very, very accurate image of how the light is distributed here, you can do the same exercise with the color. And we will most likely do it in the next session. Saying, okay, outside is a hot day with a blue sky, da, 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 da. And everything's colorized by yellow. And the cave is actually kind of bluish green stone. So yellow will cast a bounce on top. And then there is some kind of fog atmospheric where the bounce light is getting dispersed. So it's kind of like more bluish. And then the shadows they kind of fade out here, right? And like add more contrast there. And here is just the edge of it, right? And so on and so forth, you know, okay, here's my statue made of red granite. So she will get the bluish cast from the fog from the top, and we'll get like yellow reddish cast from the bottom. And then you can paint in details. So everything will come together organically. And this is what I would call realism, okay? It can be rendered almost as a manga, but the shadows are realistic. The lighting is realistic. And eventually when you render it, the values on all those objects, they will be not only realistic. First of all, you imagine them as they would have been, and then you tweak them up to work for the image. So you want to accentuate this, we'll create a gradient going upwards. You want to soften the contrast here, okay, we will add a bounce here, and so on and so forth. So this is a lot of information in one session. Okay, we are at 48 minutes here. So I guess, I mean, I can rant for hours. So we better stop and see if there's some questions. There's a source file to this on the network that you're welcome to download.
Thank you, Sasha, for putting the complex class into a very short time frame. Hopefully that you get to learn something in this class. And if you have questions, you can type here now. If not, I already posted the source files in here. And feel free to ask me for the recording of this class if you have questions, or ask Sasha. And thank you, Master.
Thank you, Ada, for the opportunity.
Awesome. Is there any questions?
Let's look at the chat.
Probably no. So thank you everyone for attending, and someone are from Asian, so it's pretty late for them. Thank you for coming.
Appreciate.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ada. Cheers.
Cheers.